Welcome, YouTubers, to another episode in my Grammar Hero series. In today's video, we're going to be talking about decimals, which is a topic you have to understand in order to be successful on both arithmetic reasoning as well as the mathematics knowledge subtest of the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery, that is the ASVAB. As you can see, there are 5 objectives for today's video. In the first half of the video, we're going to work on adding, subtracting, multiplying, and dividing decimals. And then in the second half of this video, we're going to devote our efforts to solving some word problems that should closely mirror the type of problems you'll see on the ASVAB. As a reminder, you're not allowed to use a formula sheet or a calculator on the ASVAB, so you have to be able to do all this arithmetic by hand. Similarly, I want to mention that in order to get the most out of this video, you should attempt to work on as many of these problems on your own as you can. That is, after I read a question, you should pause the video, attempt to work out the question on your own, and then resume playing the video to see if you and I came up with the same solution. All those things being said, let's go ahead and get started with today's video. All right, so as you can see, we're going to start today's video by adding decimals. It's a pretty simple and straightforward process. As you can see, for number 1, we have 35.43 plus 121.9. When you're adding decimals, it's always a good idea to do the work off to the side so as not to make any simple mistakes. More specifically, it's a good idea to put the bigger number on top in your addition. So we're going to do 121.9 plus, and at this point we want to line up our decimals. So we know this is going to be 35.43. And if it's helpful, we can fill in these empty spaces with 0. So as we can see, there's no 0 above 3, so let's place one there. And there's no 0 below 1, so we can place one there if we want. Now it's just a matter of doing this addition. Of course, you can drop down your decimal in place. It's not going to move as we work on adding decimals. So now we have 0 plus 3, which is 3. 9 plus 4, which is 13. So we drop down a 3 and carry our 1. 1 plus 5 is 6, plus 1 is 7. 2 plus 3 is 5. 1 plus nothing is 1. So we can see that 35.43 plus 121.9 is in fact 157.33. Okay, so let's work on this next example. Again, if you're following along at home, you should pause the video, try to work this out on your own, and then resume playing the video to see if you and I came up with the same answer. But that said, we have 200.43, so let's write that as our top number since it's the bigger number. Then we have 12.67, so that's 12.67. We're doing addition, of course, and if you want to, you can plug in a 0 right here so that you know that there's going to be nothing added to 2. Again, drop down your decimal in place, and then just do addition as you normally would. 3 plus 7 is 10, so we drop down a 0 and carry a 1. 4 plus 6 is 10, plus 1 is 11, so we drop down a 1 and carry a 1. 2 plus nothing is 2, plus 1 is 3. 1 plus nothing is 1, and 2 plus nothing is 2. So as we can see, 200.43 plus 12.67 is in fact 213.10. Okay, so that's all there is to adding decimals. It's pretty straightforward. If you can add regular numbers, adding decimals is pretty much the same process. Let's take a look at subtracting decimals now. For number 1, you can see we have 50 minus 25.42. Again, as we did with adding decimals, we're going to put the bigger number on top. So in this case, 50, of course, is bigger than 25.42, so we'll put 50 on top. In case it's not obvious, the decimal's right here in 50. And then we have subtract 25.42. Again, as we did when we added decimals, you can fill in zeros as needed. And in this case, we're starting by asking ourselves, what is 0 minus 2? We can't work that out, so we're going to have to borrow. Normally, when we borrow, we look to the next number over. That's 0, so there's nothing we can borrow. Then we're going to look over one more time. That's 0, so there's nothing to borrow there. We're going to have to come all the way over here to this 5 and borrow from it. This is going to become 4. This is going to become 10 now. That said, we still don't have enough to do subtraction here, so we're going to have to borrow from 10 to make it 9, and then make this one 10. And then we're going to have to borrow one more time to make this one 9, and now this one's 10. And as you can see, we can now do this math. 10 minus 2 is 8. 9 minus 4 is 5. Drop down your decimal in place. 9 minus 5 is 4. And then 4 minus 2 is, in fact, 2. So as we can see, 50 minus 25.42 is 2458. All right, so for number 2, you can see that we have 45.20 minus 100.25. Again, we want to write the bigger number on top, and this is going to help us do this arithmetic by hand. Even though this is minus 120.25, it's a bigger number, so let's put it on top. That's 100.25, and we're going to subtract 4520 from it. Now, if we take a look at this real quickly, we can see that we have 45.20 minus 100.25. We know this result has to be negative since we're taking away a bigger number from a smaller number. So right away, we know this result's negative. That said, to do this arithmetic, we have to set it up like this. We have to put the bigger number on top. So let's go ahead and work on that. 5 minus 0 is 5. 2 minus 2 is 0. Bring down your decimal place. 0 minus 5 we can't do, so we're going to have to borrow. We look to the left, we see that's a 0 as well, so we're going to have to come all the way over here and borrow. This is going to become 0, and this is going to become 10. Again, we're going to have to borrow one more time, so this is going to become 9, and this is going to become 10. So we have 10 minus 5, which is 5, and 9 minus 4, which is 5. So as we can see, 45.20 minus 100.25 is 55.05. All right, so let's take a look at how to do multiplication involving decimals. And of course, we're going to write these off to the side because we're going to have to make some adjustments to these prior to doing the multiplication. For number 1, it says 35.3 times 4.1. So if we write that off to the side, that looks like this. 35.3 times 4.1. Now, there are multiple ways to do multiplication involving decimals. The way I like to do it is to make all the decimals in the multiplication problem a whole number. So to make 35.3 a whole number, I have to shift its decimal place one time to the right. And in order to make 4.1 a whole number, I have to shift its decimal place one time to the right. So in total, I shifted my decimal place in both 35.3 and 4.1 two times. After I get done doing the arithmetic involving these whole numbers, which again are 3, 53, and 41 now, I'm going to take that decimal and shift it 2 places back to the left to make up for the fact that I moved the decimals to the right over here. So now we're just doing multiplication with whole numbers, and then at the end we'll shift our decimals back in. So let's see what that looks like. We have 3 times 1, which is 3, 5 times 1, which is 5, 3 times 1, which is 3. Before we start multiplication with this 4, we have to bring in a 0. 4 times 3 is 12, carry your 1. 5 times 4 is 20, plus 1 is 21, so you bring down a 1 and carry a 2. 4 times 3 is 12, plus 2 is 14. Let's do some addition now. We have 3 plus 0, which is 3, 5 plus 2, which is 7, 3 plus 1, which is 4, 4 plus nothing is 4, and 1 plus nothing is 1. Bring our two decimals back in, 1, 2. So we can see that 35.3 times 4.1 is 144.73. Okay, so let's get some more practice at shifting those decimals. For number 2, you can see we have 2.19 times 3.5. So off to the side, that looks like this. And in this case, when you're multiplying decimals, you always want to write the number that has the most digits on top. So in 2.19, there's 1, 2, 3 digits. Whereas in 3.5, there's 1, 2 digits. So let's go ahead and set that up like this. It's going to look weird at first, but once we move our decimals, it's going to make more sense. So we have 2.19 times 3.5. Again, if you're using my method, I like to shift these decimals to make both of these whole numbers. So in order to make 2.19 a whole number, I'm going to shift its decimal place 2 times, and then to make 3.5 a whole number, I'm going to shift its decimal place 1 time. So in total, I moved the decimal places in both numbers 3 times, and I made 2.19 219, and I made 3.5 35. So in reality, I'm working out this problem 219 times 35, albeit with those 3 decimals to shift back into the left when I'm done. And as we can see, even though I put the smaller number up top here, now it makes more sense. So again, put the decimal when you're doing multiplication with the most digits on top, because you're going to have to shift the decimals and you want it to line up correctly. All right, so let's just work this out now. We have 9 times 5, which is 45. So drop down your 5 and carry your 4. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 4 is 9. 5 times 2 is 10. Before we start multiplication with this 3, we have to bring in a 0 placeholder. 9 times 3 is 27, so bring down your 7 and bring up your 2. 3 times 1 is 3, plus 2 is 5, and 3 times 2 is 6. All right, let's add. 5 plus 0 is 5. 9 plus 7 is 16. Carry your 1. 5 plus 0 is 5, plus 1 is 6. And then 6 plus 1 is 7. Bring in your 2 decimals, or your 3 decimals in this case. 1, 2, 3. So we can see that 2.19 times 3.5 is 7.665. Okay? All right, so now that we've done multiplication, let's take a look at the final objective in this first half of this video. That is, let's take a look at how to divide with questions involving decimals. And for number 1, you can see we have 46.32 divided by 1.2. So let's write that off to the side. Again, we have 46.32 divided by 1.2. The key to doing division involving decimals is this. This number outside the division bracket, which is 1.2 in this case, cannot be a decimal. And this is called the divisor. So in order to make this divisor a non-decimal number, a whole number, we're going to have to shift its decimal place 1 time to the right. And we're going to shift that decimal inside the division bracket a corresponding number of times. And now we have this question. 463.2 divided by 12. Again, the divisor is now a whole number, so we can proceed doing this division as we normally would. In fact, before you begin, you can bring up your decimal right there if you wanted to. So now the question is, how many times does 12 go into 4? It doesn't. How many times does 12 go into 46 without going over? That's going to be 3 times, given that 12 times 3 is 36. 46 minus 36 is 10. And we're going to drop down this 3. And we're going to drop down this 2 as well. Now the question is, how many times does 12 go into 103 without going over? That's going to be 8 times, given that 8 times 12 is 96. So now we have 103 minus 96. 3 minus 6 we can't do, and we can't borrow from this 0, so we're going to have to borrow twice. This is going to become 0, this is going to become 10, borrow one more time, this is going to become 9, and this is going to become 13. 13 minus 6, of course, is 7. 9 minus 9 is 0. 0 minus 0 is nothing. Now we drop down this 2. So now the question is, how many times does 12 go into 72? Of course, that's going to be 6 times, given that 12 times 6 is, in fact, 72. So we can see there's no remainder. In other words, 46.32 divided by 1.2 is 38.6. Okay? So that's that one. Let's go ahead and take a look at another example. So again, in this case, we have a fraction, notably 45 over 0.04. So again, fractions can all be regarded as long division, so you have to be mindful of that on the ASVAB. In this case, we could read this as 45 divided by 0.04, okay? And as we can see again, we have the divisor, which is this number outside this division bracket. That's a decimal. In order to proceed, we're going to have to shift this decimal in the divisor 2 times to make 0.044. And of course, the decimal's right here in 45, so we're going to have to shift this 2 times as well. So now this becomes 4,500. Okay, so let's work on this division and we'll be done. 4 goes into 4 one time. 4 times 4 is 4, so we'll subtract 4 minus 4, which is 0. We're going to drop down this 5 and 2 zeros. Now the question is, how many times does 4 go into 5? Again, that's 1 time. 4 times 1 is 4. Let's subtract. 5 minus 4 is 1. Bring down these 2 zeros. And now it should be clear that 4 goes into 100 25 times. And so 4 times 25 is 100. And of course, there's no remainder. So as we can see, 45 divided by 0.04 is 1125. Okay? So again, that's how to divide decimals. All right, now that we've taken a look at how to do all those operations involving decimals, let's take a look at some word problems that should closely mirror what you'll see on the ASVAB. So that said, let's get started. Question 1, as you can see, says, Melissa purchased $39.46 in groceries at a store. How much change should she get back if she pays with a $50 bill? So this is going to be a subtraction problem involving decimals. When we subtract involving decimals, we always put the bigger number on top, so we're going to put 50 on top. Its decimal, of course, is right there, and we're going to subtract out how much she spent, so that's going to be 39.46. And if it's helpful, we can add in some 0 placeholders. So now we're starting this problem by doing 0 minus 6. Again, we're going to have to borrow, and when we borrow, we look to the left. That's a 0. There's nothing to borrow there. Look to the left one more time, another 0. Now we're looking at this 5, and we're going to have to borrow from it. This is going to become 4. This is going to become 10. Again, we're not quite ready to do this subtraction yet. We still have a 0 over 6. Going to have to borrow one more time. This is going to become 9. This is going to become 10. And we're going to borrow a final time. So that's going to become 9. And now this is going to become 10. 10 minus 6 is 4. 9 minus 4 is 5. Drop your decimal down in place. 9 minus 9 is 0. And 4 minus 3 is 1. So as we can see, she should get back $10.54 in change if she paid with a $50 bill. Okay, and you will see questions like this on the ASVAB, especially in the very beginning when they're really testing your knowledge of these simple topics like how to subtract with decimals. All right, as we can see, number 2 says carpeting cost $1.50 a yard. If Jim buys 20.4 yards, how much will it cost him? So to figure this out, we're going to take our decimals and multiply them together. That is, we're going to do 20.4 times 150. And as you can see, we're now doing multiplication involving two decimals. The key, as I mentioned, to doing this is to move your decimal place however many times you need to in order to make the decimals whole numbers. So I'm going to shift the decimal in 20.4 one time to the right to make 20.4 204, and then 1.50, I'm going to shift the decimal two times to the right to make a 1.50 150. Of course, we move the decimal place a total of 1 plus 2 three times. So once I work out this arithmetic, I'm going to shift the decimal back into the left three times. So let's work on this. We have 0 times 4, which is 0, 0 times 0, which is 0, 2 times 0, which is 0. Okay? Before we start multiplication with this 5, we have to bring in a 0 placeholder. 5 times 4 is 20, so bring down a 0, carry a 2. 5 times 0 is 0, plus 2 is 2. 2 times 5 is 10. Okay, so let's do multiplication with this 1 now. And before we begin, we have to bring down two 0 placeholders now. So that's going to be 1 times 4, which is 4. 1 times 0, which is 0. And then 1 times 2, which is going to be 2. So let's add all this up. 0 plus 0 plus 0 is 0. 0 plus 0 plus 0 is 0. 2 plus 4 is 6. 0 plus 0 is 0. And then 1 plus 2 is 3. Let's bring in our three decimals. That's going to be 1, 2, 3. So as we can see, the total he's going to pay is $30.60 for the carpet. Okay, must be pretty cheap carpet. All right, so that's number 2. All right, number 3 says Larry paid $11.20 for 4 gallons of gas. How much was each gallon of gas? So this is going to be $11.20 divided by 4. And as you may recall, the key to doing division involving decimals is this: to ensure that this divisor is not a decimal. In this case, it's just 4, so we don't have to make any adjustments before we proceed. Let's just bring our decimal up in place, and now let's work on this problem. 4 goes into 11 two times without going over. 4 times 2 is 8. 11 minus 8, 8, 9, 10, 11. That's going to be 3. Drop down this 2 and drop down this 0. 4 goes into 32 8 times. Therefore, 4 goes into 320 80 times. 4 times 80 is 320. So we can see there's no remainder there. So in other words, he paid, I don't know what I'm doing there, $2.80 per gallon of gas. All right, number 4 says Samantha bought 15 party hats priced at 75 cents each and 15 noisemakers priced at $1.25 each. How much did she spend in total? So for this problem, we're going to have to do 2 instances of multiplication involving decimals, and then we're going to have to add those decimals together. So that's going to look like this. 0.75 times 15. And then we're going to have to do 1.25 times 15. And in this case, we can see we're doing multiplication involving a decimal and a whole number. And over here, you can see we have a decimal and a whole number as well. So let's set these up to get rid of these decimals. I'm going to shift this decimal in 0.75 two times to the right to make it just 75 times 15. And of course, I'm going to move those 2 decimals back into the left when I'm done. And in this one, I'm going to shift it 2 times to the right to make 1.25 125. Of course, that's times 15. And when I'm done working this out, I'm going to shift those decimals 2 times to the left again. So let's work these out. Once we find these amounts, we'll just add them together and we'll be done. 5 times 5 is 25, carrier 2. 7 times 5 is 35, 36, 37. Add a 0 before we start multiplication with that 1. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 7 is 7. Let's add. 5 plus 0 is 5. 7 plus 5, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Carrier 1. 7 plus 3 is 10, plus 1 is 11. And so we can see that we have to shift our 2 decimals in. So we can see that the 15 party hats were 11.25. Let's work on this one now. 5 times 5 is 25. Bring down a 5, carry a 2. 5 times 2 is 10, plus 2 is 12. Bring down a 2, carry a 1. 5 times 1 is 5, plus 1 is 6. Add a 0 before you start multiplication with this number. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. Let's add. 5 plus 0 is 5. 2 plus 5 is 7. 6 plus 2 is 8, and 1 plus nothing is 1. Bring our 2 decimals back in. So we can see that the total for these noisemakers is 1875. So to finish this problem, we're going to take 1875 and add that to 1125. 5 plus 5, and again, we line up our decimals and we can drop it in place if we want right now. 5 plus 5 is 10, so bring down a 0, carry a 1. 7 plus 2 is 9, plus 1 is 10, so we're going to bring down a 0 and carry a 1. 8 plus 1 is 9, plus 1 is 10. Bring down a 0 and carry a 1. 1 plus 1 plus 1 is 3. So we can see in total, Samantha spent $30 on these noisemakers and party hats. And that is it for today's video. It should have been shorter than my usual videos, but that said, we did cover quite a bit of ground. Again, just to recap, we looked at how to add, subtract, multiply, and divide decimals. And then we used our knowledge of those operations to solve some word problems that will mirror what you'll see on the ASVAB. So, as always, you're more than welcome to leave some feedback in the comment section below. If you like the content I'm creating, please consider subscribing to this channel. But on that note, I'm going to go ahead and cut you loose. Konnichiwa.